Glad to see you here again on day 2. We have a great day packed full of some super presenters. And right now I'd like to introduce Wisconsin Family Ties Executive Director, Mr. Hugh Davis. He has actually just celebrated his 20th year at Wisconsin Family Ties. So give him a big round of applause.
Good morning. Hope all of you are having a good time at the 33rd Children Come First Conference. We're grateful that you're here. Just a couple of things that I wanted to mention before I introduce our next speaker. If you noticed on the slideshow, we've had a couple of slides up related to Mona Delahook, who has spoken twice at the Children Come First Conference. She's one of our favorite speakers. In late August, Mona suffered a ruptured brain aneurysm. She was in a coma for weeks and recently had regained consciousness, and we had the post from her family on the slideshow if you read that. Just yesterday, they posted again and said, very positive news, our mom is speaking, and it is quite literally music to our ears. And she wanted to share this message with her community, and I quote, "I'm so grateful for everybody's support, and I appreciate hearing from each of you. It's helping my healing process." And so we're going to have an opportunity for anybody who wants to send a message to Mona. We had hoped to have something up here, but it's so many activities that it just didn't come to fruition. So I hope you'll be patient with us as we send an email out to everyone who's attending the conference this year with an invitation to sign an e-card for Mona. And so be looking for that in the coming days. And if any of you have been here at any of the years that Mona was our speaker, you know how special she is, and to this conference especially. She's been a good friend to us here. So look for that in the coming days. You know, I debated whether to say this, but I'm going to anyway. I sat in on a number of sessions yesterday that were parents who were talking about their kids and some of the challenges that their family was facing in not only getting the right services and supports for their kids, but the struggle to have people understand their kids and their family better. And what really struck me was the unyielding commitment of these parents to their kids and the deep love that they have for their kids, despite some pretty challenging situations. And it made me reflect back many years ago when I was a teenager. And I remember one incident that had a profound impact on me. I actually got suspended from school. That's back in the day when they didn't do that. So suspensions were rare. And I got suspended, and my dad had to come and pick me up. And I was not really looking forward to that. And instead of just going home and sitting, we drove about 30 miles away and went to a restaurant and had lunch. And while we were sitting there, he said one thing to me that I've never forgotten. He said, "There's nothing you could do to make me love you less." And that phrase just resonated in my head yesterday as I listened to all of these parents talking about their kids. Kids who had threatened them and had harmed themselves, and yet the love for their kids shone through. And I just think that's pretty remarkable. And so for those of you who are parents here, thank you for that. And for those of you who work with these kids and families, please recognize that and remember that. So this morning I have the privilege of introducing a friend of mine, at least a person I consider a friend. Hopefully he considers me the same. Jason Cram, who is the Deputy Director of the Bureau of Prevention, Treatment, and Recovery, mouthful, at the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. I've known Jason, I don't know, how many years have you been at, in 6 or 7 years? And I have to admit that DHS has not always been receptive to listening to some of the things that we had to say as an organization. Jason is different. Jason has always listened to others' perspectives. He's challenged those perspectives. He doesn't accept them at face value, which I'm perfectly fine with and actually appreciate. But he listens nonetheless, and that has been a tremendous, I think, change and something that we value highly in that relationship, that we can talk about virtually any kind of subject or issue, and I know that he will listen and will engage in a good dialogue. And so it is truly an honor for me to introduce Jason Cram.
Yes, Hugh, we are friends. Good morning, everyone. Again, Jason Cram, Department of Health Services. I'm going to talk for about probably 5 or 7 minutes, and then I'll introduce the keynote morning speaker. Children and families are valued and understood and supported in their communities. Again, children and families are valued, understood, and supported in their communities. That is the vision of the Wisconsin Children's Systems of Care. Some of you may be familiar with that vision. Some of you may be familiar with our Wisconsin Children's Systems of Care efforts over the last quite a couple of years. Some of you may have participated in the summit that took place in April. So I just want to quickly talk about some work that we've done within that vision, just 2 pieces, and I'm also going to talk briefly about a new initiative that's taking place within DHS called Wisconsin Wayfinder. We have in my team, in the Children, Youth, and Family team at DHS, we've been involved in a number of complex care consultations. We get called in by counties, tribal nations, Winnebago Mental Health Institute oftentimes, and we get called in to consult not just the Children Youth team, but also the CCS team as well. And sometimes we're confronted in those situations with some scenarios where parents and families don't always feel valued and understood. At DHS, we don't really have the direct capacity, say, to advocate on their behalf. What we can do, though, is help guide people through the system and help kind of navigate what works, what doesn't work, and what's allowed and what's not allowed. But in those cases where families aren't feel valued and understood and supported, oftentimes what we do is we make referrals then, or the system, we encourage them to make referrals to either Disability Rights Wisconsin or Wisconsin Family Ties. And this isn't a promo for Wisconsin Family Ties. I just want to talk about, just briefly, a situation where we had a family who really felt undervalued by the system. And the referral was made to Family Ties, and the very next day, Family Ties then came in person to provide support to that family. And the very next thing that person said, the mom said, was, "Boy, that's the first time I felt valued in a very long time." And we got to really hand it to Family Ties and DRW in those situations. So thank you for that, Hugh and team. So the Wisconsin Children's Systems of Care, which again, you're all very much a part of, it includes people with lived experience, it includes providers, it includes tribal nations, It includes the state, meaning DPI and DHS and DCF, are all part of the Wisconsin Children's Systems of Care. In April, we had a summit where we had over 130 participants from all those different groups of people that I just mentioned, and a few more, come and participate in developing a 6-year strategic plan for our system of care. And from that summit then came 5 different work teams, and those work teams are, let me get my notes here, crisis support and specialized residential care, parent and youth peer supports initiatives, the public health approach and the mental health integration, so that's the integration of mental health and substance use, as well as the integration of behavioral health into the primary care world, workforce development, as well as issues affecting governance and funding in state and local partnerships. So those are the 5 work teams that came out of the summit. Those teams have been meeting regularly now the past couple of months, and by February, we will have a 6-year strategic plan. The reason we're going with 6 years is because it will then coincide with the state budget cycle. I'm thinking that there may very well be some budget recommendations that come out of that strategic plan. The folks that are kind of governing that strategic plan is the Children Come First Advisory Committee, which you may or may not be familiar with. Some of you are members of that, I know. And that committee, this isn't a DHS-driven initiative, although it was funded through, the funding started through using some ARPA dollars through DHS, but truly it is an initiative of the Children Come First Advisory Committee, which, by the way, is separate from Children Come First itself, but there's a lot of connections there. So by February of next year, we will have in our hands a 6-year strategic plan, which we will be held accountable for by that committee, by the Children Come First Advisory Committee. The strategic plan will include what we're calling objectives and key results. I won't get into the great details of those, but essentially we'll have measurable objectives and key results that we will be able to work towards. So next year at this conference, at the Children Come First conference, we will be rolling out that strategic plan, realizing that there's a gap between February and November of next year, but we'll roll out that strategic plan there as well. And we will come back every year to report on its progress. One more thing about that too. At the summit this year, we had a Systems of Care Champion Award, and that award went to the Western Region Wellness and Recovery Consortium in northwestern Wisconsin. Moving forward, many of you will receive, if you're on one of our Gov delivery lists, a nomination form for next year's Champion Award. And that award will be announced here at the 34th Annual Children Come First Conference. All right. And then finally, I want to just briefly talk about Wisconsin Wayfinder. I went back and looked at the DHS table, and I didn't quite see if there was any flyers there yet, but I'm told there will be some flyers for this coming up. So Wisconsin Wayfinder, it is a new resource for children, families, caregivers, and here are the talking points that they told me to make sure I cover. It's understanding a child's delays or disabilities and special health care needs and mental health conditions can be complex, whether you're a parent, caregiver, or a professional in the field. Families and professionals who work with families may need resources and information to help them find their way. When you're trying to understand the many different agencies, resources, and eligibility criteria for programs, the journey to find the right services can be hard. Wisconsin Wayfinder connects families and professionals to free information and referral services that support children and youth ages 0 to 21 who have delays, disabilities, special health care needs, and mental health conditions. The phone number is 877-WISC-WAY or 877-947-2929, or you can simply Google Wisconsin Wayfinder. There's a whole resource and whole network of individuals who are available to help, and essentially if you call this number, they'll take your information and then connect you with individuals in your area. So there's a number of hubs across Wisconsin who have this set of knowledge, and that way you're not just connecting to one Wisconsin contact number and then they don't necessarily know where to refer you to. You're really getting connected to local services. And finally, I have the privilege of introducing your morning keynote, Pat Miles. Miss Miles, many of you know her from previous work in Wisconsin. She's a wraparound pioneer. In the late 80s, when she was the director of the Community Care Center in Kenai, Alaska, she led one of the first implementations of Wraparound as she and her staff found one creative solution after another to bring home Alaskan children who were in long-term placement in treatment centers as far away as Texas and beyond. While Pat was leading the implementation of Wraparound in Columbus, Ohio in the early 90s, she also became a featured speaker at systems of care and wraparound conferences throughout the United States, including several of the early Children Come First conferences here in Wisconsin. This led to increased connections with Wisconsin as she helped with the development of Wraparound Milwaukee, including authoring several volumes of that agency's Wraparound Facilitator Manual. Pat also consulted for the Wisconsin Department of Health Services later in the decade, and actually more recently as just a few years ago, Pat was consulting with DHS. For nearly 30 years, Pat has been a national consultant assisting communities around the country with program design, implementation, and improvement. Everyone, please let me welcome Pat Miles.
Thank you, Jason. You guys hear me okay? Good morning. Glad to be here. Surprised Jason's saying such nice things about me. We'll see if we can do something about that by the time we're done today. Guys got me advanced here? Okay. Let's talk about Wraparound. I'm an old person now, so I get to talk about the good old days in Wraparound, but we're not going to stop there. I want you to be clear about that. First thing I want to tell you is how pleased I am to be here again. The first time I came to one of these conferences, it was a very small room. And there were a handful of parents and there were a handful of professionals, and this is a whole lot bigger, and it speaks to the amount of effort y'all have made, as well as the capacity to welcome new folks. And so I'm delighted to be here and to also get a chance to network with parents who are often and always my greatest teachers. So I want to start by kind of going back to where we were when we started with Wraparound, what we were facing and what was going on. And things weren't working that well. Families couldn't get in. Lots and lots of mental health centers didn't even allow kids to come through the door. And so a family that had things going on, they're just, how did you get going? Where did you go? Who did you turn to? Parents often were left out by design. Kids might be placed, parents may not be invited to the table, or if they're invited to the table, they might be invited after the plan was done. Young people were lost in systems sometimes for years. When I think about Wraparound Milwaukee, I remember those first kids, those first 25 kids, and there were kids that had been in placement for 10 plus years who were only 12. So that's a long time in placement. That's a long time with strangers. And so we had kids lost in systems, the lost children. We also had budgets that were getting stressed out. Budgets, we were in a financial situation, systems in competition. Every time you turned around, it seemed like one system was dropping off somebody at another system, and it seemed like kids were being handed around, handed off. All of that was going on. And it really felt like a push-out model, and where folks were focused on the next best referral. So that was the backdrop of Wraparound. Where did it come from? People say, who came up with Wraparound? Well, I'm going to tell you, Wraparound was not fully baked. It was a half-baked idea. And it was a half-baked idea driven by the idea that maybe we could do better. And these are the emergent ideas that came out. Maybe if we worked together, kind of like a team, things could be better. And that had to start and include the parents and children as part of that team. Maybe if we listened to families, we could figure out some different solutions, because maybe we just weren't asking the right questions. And so, and that was really the idea of, could we build a determined by family kind of system? Maybe it would make a difference if we truly listened. The next idea was, maybe in all this dreck, there's some good news. Maybe the truth is that these kids who have these stories and these labels and these jackets and these files also are somebody that somebody desperately loves. Maybe they're also kids who can dance, who can make you laugh, who can play pranks, who might go too far with their pranks sometimes, but you can see the sense of humor and the potential and the possibility. And so maybe if we talked a little bit more about strengths and a little bit less about the problem, maybe things could get better. And then this idea of what would happen if instead of focusing on what we needed to do, we focused on what the hole in the heart was. If we focused on what's the hole in the heart that causes you to do the things you shouldn't and keeps you from doing the things you should, rather than saying, what are we going to do about Johnny's misbehavior in school? Maybe if we worked harder at understanding why Johnny needed to misbehave in school, things could get better, which was driven by underlying need. And if we dared to create interventions on a one child and one family at a time basis, maybe if we could get a Jason, who maybe was having a good day or a bad day, who'd say, well, try it, but don't tell anybody, don't write it down. Or maybe we could get a coordinator who could say, well, maybe we could try this. And a parent would say, let's take the risk, let's do it, maybe things could get better. And so, I look for stories about wraparound, and they're everywhere. It's just that we don't recognize that they're about wraparound. So I'm going to bring some video clips to you today with stories about wraparound, and this describes how the system was working at that time.
Who rang that bell?
We did.
Can't you read?
Read what?
The notice.
What notice?
It's on the door, as plain as the nose on my face.
Bell out of order. Please knock.
Well, that's more like it. Now, straight your business.
I like this video because it kind of shows what the parents' experience is when they were going into systems. They would knock on the door, they would say, who rang the bell? You didn't follow the directions, now follow the directions. And if you remember, the next part in the scene is this. Oh, we're closed for business today. And so this idea or this image of a door. And so many of you, how many of you have ever seen this movie? How many of you knew it was a movie about wraparound? Well, it is and it was. So let's go on to the next one. Where did we land with those early ideas? We landed with maybe we could cluster or bundle these practices together. Maybe just doing strengths wasn't enough. Maybe you needed to do strengths plus team plus needs plus determined by family and bundle them together. And so all of those things represented a major lurch forward. And if you're practicing in the field, one of the astounding things is how different it can look from one community to the next. And that's because it was a half-baked design. We didn't build it in the laboratory, we built it in the community. What did that mean? We learned from the community. We learned from the families that said, sure, I'll take a chance on this. The second thing we learned is that if we lurched forward with these practices, we had to change systems as well. Because the practices wouldn't sustain if we didn't deal with changing systems. So when we do a study, when we implement a new initiative, when we bring people together in a conference like this, it's about changing systems. Or what it always looks like, when it happens right, is it always looks like an accident of good practice. But it always looks like an accident. And I don't know, but I think people who come to this conference don't want their kids treated as an accident. They want it to happen in the way it should. Maybe life could be better for these families that we were learning from. Maybe not the best. Maybe it's not going to be perfect. But life could be better. And a growing realization that what we had in our cupboard or our pantry wasn't likely to be enough. So we had to work together to build something different. And the big idea is if we kept at it, maybe things could be incrementally better. And so we did land someplace with Wraparound. And when you talk about 34 years and you talk about where you're at, all of you, even those that this may be your first conference, recognize there's a tradition that's going with you, and recognize we learned some things, which is, it's not about an expert-driven model, it's about all of us.
But it wasn't a dream. It was a place. And you, and you, and you, and you were there.
Oh, sure.
But you couldn't have been, could you?
Oh, we dream lots of silly things when we...
No, Aunt Em. This was a real, truly live place. And I remember that some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful. But just the same, all I kept saying to everybody was, I want to go home. And they sent me home.
So, what did we learn? We learned that the answer was in all of us. We learned that, in fact, we could have a brain. We learned that, in fact, administrators could have courage and take calculated risks with us. We learned that, of course, we could have a heart. And, of course,
like home. There's no place like home.
There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place.
So, I'm looking at you, Gen Z. I know you're sitting here thinking, I got out of bed this morning to watch this old lady show me a bunch of movies from 1939. But we're done with the past. That's kind of where we've landed, moving forward. And we moved into these growth years. And the growth years were really about increased implementation. When I think about Wraparound Milwaukee, at one point I drove to, it seemed like every county in Wisconsin with Eleanor McLean, for those of you who've been around long enough to know her. And I actually spent my first night in a casino with her. And I didn't win, just so you know. What we saw is we saw increased implementation. We saw more and more people starting to say, oh, this is interesting, or this might be a way to solve some problems. There's a way that we could grow up. We also saw more reference to the word wraparound. And so in the political season, the silly season, if you listen to politicians, almost all of them will say, well, what's really needed here is wraparound services. I got a call from the CIA last year. Can you teach us how to do wraparound? Because we need to do wraparound with a group of people we're worried about. And I was like, I don't think what I'm talking about is what you guys are really looking for, but we can talk about it. They didn't call back. But, wraparound is on everybody's lips. People have heard it. We see more references. We see it in policy. We see it in politics. We see lots of things called wraparound. For those of you who've spent some time in wraparound, there may be moments when people will say, oh yeah, we're doing wraparound, and you might scratch your head and say, I don't think that's what this is. Have you had that experience, Ann? It happens. But what it tells you is it's going mainstream. There also, within wraparound implementation, there were add-on opportunities. And one of the things that's particularly interesting that I see across the country with the add-on opportunities is we see more and more opportunities to pilot peer support. Peer support for parents and peer support for youth. Now, that's a tricky thing, I will tell you that, because while wraparound is designed to be supportive, peer support is a particular type of support. Connecting with another parent or another youth is a powerful healer in and of itself. And it's important to not hijack peer support as part of your wraparound implementation, which is one of the things that I worry about. But the fact of the matter is peer parent support and peer youth support is unlikely to have grown the way it has had we not had this field called Wraparound where we could experiment with what does it mean to connect a parent with another parent? What does it mean to connect a youth who's navigated complex systems with another youth who can say, I know your story. My story's different, but I know your story because at least I know the feeling. I know that feeling you had, which is often what's buried or hidden. So that we've seen some add-on opportunities. We've also seen some other kind of experimental approaches in the context of wraparound. We also have seen an increased focus on identifying, describing the young people that we're worried about when we do things like wraparound or create deep end services. For a long time, we just waited until kids failed up. And when they failed up, then everybody would come together and do something flexible. And so we see more and more work to try to describe who the kids are. As a parent who has landed on the other side of the system counter, there's always a moment, it seems to me, where you go, who is this kid and what do people really think about him or her? How did this happen? And so the movement around getting better about describing who the children are, I think is very important so that we can have a language around that. So neither parents or children have to carry that by themselves. The problem with many of the assessment tools is there's wide variance on how they're being implemented. And what we don't want to do is find those assessment tools being used to categorize rather than to describe a life. That's the danger of it. The other thing we have going on is there's an emerging workforce. There's a whole field of people that do community-based work now. Look at this room. It's a big deal. You see a conference like this. There this many people that are working around building strong communities that can care for kids and that can support those kids so we don't have lost children. That's a big deal. That didn't used to be a group of people. What we had in systems is people who had real offices somewhere, and people would come see them and say, what can you do to make things better for me? Now there are these folks that maybe have never had an office in their life. They're always traveling, and it's become a whole thing. And, when we talk about wraparound and community-based people, some people say they're a special breed. They're just special. There's something about them. Some people say, and I know, Ann, you've had this experience, some people say they're a little wacky. They're just a little less mainstream than I'd like. See, she just spit at me. Somebody has to Heimlich her because she's having a flashback to her glory days. I don't know if I like hanging out with those community-based people. They're not very disciplined. They're always being so creative. I just don't like it that much. And the thing is, about a conference like this, how many of you feel like this conference is your chance to come home? How many of you feel like when you get here, these are my people? I'm at my place. That feeling of saying, I've found my people. And as a community-based workforce, we need to be proud of that. But the thing I want you to be clear about is that we don't always feel like we completely fit in. I have another piece of tape to show you.
Wow, this is the real world.
Barbie, I told you there'd be beach.
Yeah. What's going on?
Give us a smile, Blondie.
Why are these men looking at me?
Yeah, they're also staring at me.
Oh, love that.
Wow.
I feel kind of ill at ease.
That's what it's often like for community-based people when we're in big conferences with other folks. I feel a little ill at ease. For those of you who haven't seen the movie Barbie, I pulled this one because I knew we'd have some Gen Z people in the room, and I didn't want you to think we were going to just spend the day looking at The Wizard of Oz. Many of you, the biggest blockbuster movie of the year has been Barbie, and many of you thought it was a movie about a doll. It's not. It's a movie about wraparound. So bear with me here. We're going to talk about this as we go through the growth years. During these growth years, we saw sustained expansion. In Wisconsin, you have much to be proud of. CCS, widely available in multiple county and tribal nations. CST, widely implemented, multiple counties and even more tribal nations, at least when I looked on your website. You have much to be proud about. Multiple staff working at coordinating care. There actually is a job called care coordinator versus it's sort of an extra thing you did at the end of the day to try to make that phone call to something. It's become a career. And not only that, some of those people in the career have actually been promoted to be supervisors and are working within systems, much to be proud of. More than 700 people at this conference. We've entered a whole new world and we've reached our destination. The fact of the matter is, when a guy like Jason takes the job he took, life is easy. This is perfect. We've arrived. Is that right, Jason? We're there. We are there. Things are going great. And for those of you that are working in the system or saying, now that I know where we've come from, I'm so happy, it's just a perfect day.
It's perfectly perfect. And you look so beautiful, Barbie. Thanks, Barbie. I feel so beautiful. So do I.
This is the best day ever.
It is the best day ever, and so is yesterday, and so is tomorrow, and so is the day after tomorrow, and even Wednesdays, and every day from now until forever. Do you guys ever think about dying? I don't know why I just said that. I'm just dying to dance.
You got it? There's Jason. He says, I've arrived, I'm at the top of my game, life is so good, it's perfectly perfect. Do you ever think about dying? And as a worker, you come into this work and we train you. I know what we do. We train you on values. We say it's going to be great. You're going to look at strengths. You're going to meet families. They're going to say, thank you for coming. Youth are going to say, oh my God, we had a child and family team meeting. Now I know everybody's on my side. I will never throw a desk again. Right? Right. And so here's the thing. Even though we've grown, we need to sometimes think about dying. And so we're going to talk about what the opportunities and what the threats are and where we can go from here. And so as we started and continued to grow, we really wanted to move beyond the special projects. When that happened, you started to see an emergence of a focus on proper wraparound. Not skunkworks wraparound, proper wraparound. Are you doing it correctly? And that's when we've seen the emergence of what I call the three system apocalyptic horsemen, which is accountability, authorization, and auditing. And what does that look like? It looks like we're going to micromanage and we're going to focus on making sure you're doing the same things because that's what we believe is the right thing, rather than saying, do things right for the families. And so that's become an issue. And so I was telling these guys, there's one state I work with that if you get audited and you're a care coordinator, one of the things you're required to do is project out the amount of service the child and family will have over the next 3 months. So if it's 20 units of individual therapy, you write that down on the plan. Seems like a reasonable thing if you're planning, right? Project. Here's the problem. If you miss the number that you projected, you get audited and you end up in a corrective action, which means you have to do more paperwork. And that's part of the accountability issue. And again, that's not done with evil intent. It's just folks trying to create a sense of accountability for a process, trying to make sure that families get the right thing, rather than making sure that families get the thing they need. The second is the authorization stuff. And I will tell you that one of the things I think we missed in Wraparound is managing managed care. Because what we've seen is centralized authorization units that are far from the family, rather than let's figure out how we can come together for the family and the community. And so authorization has become an issue. And the other part of that is about managing the budget rather than managing to the right thing. And then, of course, we've got auditing. What's the number one reasons why people leave community-based services? Staff? Paperwork. It's paperwork. They never say it's the families, it's the children. They never say that. They always say, number one, it's the paperwork. Anybody here love paperwork? Right there. You must be the QA coordinator. So that's a particularly interesting and alarming thing, because part of what we're doing is we are tightening down and managing this so much, we may be losing the very essence of wraparound. That creativity, that creative, let's try it. We could do something with this. We also have seen, as it's become more mainstream, some erosion of those big ideas. We've seen teams, for example, become more functionalized and less organic. What do I mean by that? We kind of see the usual suspects sitting at team tables. And as much as we say, bring your natural supports, we haven't necessarily created the table that our natural supports would want to sit at. Do any of you have inappropriate friends? None? Ann, I know you do. Okay, let me ask the question differently for Ann. Ann, are you an inappropriate friend to anybody? Okay. So when you start to think about that, our message to families has been, bring your natural supports to the table so that eventually, when we're done with our work, they can be supportive of you and you'll have support. Wrong idea. Teams are our tool. Teams aren't families' tool. First thing in a family's mind is not, ooh, I need a team. First thing in a family's mind is, I need help. Our tool is to bring a team together. Why? Because we know we don't have the answer. And so we think if we work together, maybe we could come up with the next best question to come up with the next best answer. And so the teams have become a bit more functional and less organic. The conversation has changed a bit. And I worry about that. I worry about that a lot. Let me also put this plug in. The mental health system has done a terrible job of resolving how do we bring mental health people to the table at the same time when only one of them can bill. It makes me insane. It makes my head blow off. That should be the low-hanging fruit we fix. There's got to be a way to create a service definition that would allow that to happen. Because when that therapist is sitting at the table, what they're thinking is, I'm not going to get my productivity, I'm not going to get my productivity, I'm not going to get my productivity, and that's an awfully high price to pay. Oh, you got a couple therapists in the room. I'm happy about that. I see you. I want you to know that. I see you, I feel you. I do think we can fix that. The second thing is strengths have become more focused on the challenge rather than expansive. And I think that's become a bit of a problem. When I pull strengths list, what I see is this is the thing that will get them through in terms of the symptom, rather than this is the person who happens to have the symptom. And so I worry a little bit that we've gotten too narrow with strengths. What are you laughing about, Rob? Oh, okay. I thought you might see yourself in this story. And, strengths, the thing about strengths are you can't ever have too many. Even if you fill up your form, you can't ever have too many. And I worry that we've gotten too narrow. The third thing is I see a shift from this idea of needing from to needing to. How many parents are in the room? How many of you have heard your daughter needs to or you need to? How many have ever heard that? Here's the thing. You don't need to do nothing. What I need to do is I need to figure out what your child needs from me and your community. You can do what your child and daughter deserve to do. And that needing to, it's killing us. It's killing us. Because if you got one of these extraordinary kids, they let you know every day, I don't care what you think I need to do because I'm not doing it because I'm going to do this other thing. And we're not going to win that battle because those kids are going to outlast us every time. So I worry a bit that the needs have been framed as what's billable rather than truly what is the hole in your heart. What is the thing that drives you in this direction? And recognize that even when you have a kid who's been in and out of systems and services from an early age, part of that hole in the heart may be torn by the interventions and the message you need to. And there's a lot of reparative work we need to do to mend that hole. We're not going to fix it, but all of us are carrying around holes in the heart. We can do something about it. And determined by family. I worry about this one as well. And I worry about it because I'm worried that we've turned this idea of voice into, what do you want? Tell us what you want. We're going to have a team meeting. Tell us what you want. Which is a great question if you have a clue. But usually when you get to a team meeting, it's the day you have finally said as a parent, this is bigger than me, I'm going to need some help, and I just got to figure out together what's the next step. And so I think about determined by family, it moves from, we're going to figure this out. I see you, you see me, I don't know what to do, but you know what? I trust that us working together will get us there better. And that's a big idea, and I worry a little bit that it's turned into, did you get your voice? Did you get a chance to say it? I recently was at a team meeting with a young man in Washington State. They said, what do you want? He said, I want to be the largest weed grower in the Northwest. And, you know, I kind of liked the moment, because I thought, well, that's pretty honest. You know what they said? Can anybody guess? What would you have said? What? Now, she's just being curious. She wants to know he's going to buy the land. I like the energy. Here's what they said. Oh, well, if you want to be the largest weed grower in the Northwest, you will need to get very good grades in math so that, you got where I'm going? So that you can balance the books. Now, do you think the kid bought it? No, he didn't buy it. He didn't go back in and say, get me the calculus book. I want to be an accountant. He said, I want to grow a lot of weed. Why do you want to grow a lot of weed? I like weed. Not because I want to do math. But you see, we do that all the time when we talk about determined by family. And let me put this in. When kids communicate to us, they communicate in a variety of ways. The least way they communicate to us is verbally. It's not what they say, it's how they say it. The most frequent way they communicate their needs is in their behavior. And that is the least frequent way that we hear them. So we wonder about why we have an epidemic of kids with ADHD. It's because we're not great at paying attention to kids' behavior and really understanding when a kid throws a desk, what are they telling me? So I worry that we've seen some erosion. I also think that what's happened is as wraparounds moved into these systems, that one of the things that's really happened is it feels like you're a little bit in the system and a little bit outside of the system. It feels like you're part of the system, you're in the system, but maybe not of the system. And I'm guessing that's probably even true for you guys at the state. That it feels like, it doesn't necessarily feel like I completely fit in. And so we see this tension that happens for workers, the tension between structure and soul, the tension between creativity and routinization, the tension between innovation and replication, that it feels like we're caught between a couple of things. And when that happens, this is what it looks like.
We've been very anxious to get some quality FaceTime with you.
Of course. So what can I do to repair the rift in the space-time continuum, get my feet back in that one cellulite gone, and just generally not turn into weird Barbie?
We have been discussing that very topic. If you're agreeable to it, we would love it if you could just get into that giant box.
There it is. Get in the box, Wraparound. If you get in the box, we'll be able to manage it. Get in the box. That means you got to have this many child and family teams. That means you have 22 days to complete your engagement phase, and then you better get that plan of care turned in. That means you've got to have a team meeting every month, even if things are going pretty well and the family's saying, maybe we could move it out to 6 weeks. That means you got to do a crisis plan the first time you meet with the family, even though by asking about the crisis plan, it may cause the family to have a crisis. That means we want to get you in the box, and that's the risk of where we are today with Wraparound. I know that's probably not true in Wisconsin, but it could be on the horizon, and so I'm giving you a warning, fair shot warning, that this is some things to worry about. The push to put Wraparound in the box. It's a free-form, oozy kind of thing that doesn't fit neatly within our systems. The other thing that we've learned, and these are big lessons that we're learning and continuing to learn every day, as we're doing Wraparound, is that things will change, and that it is a constant learning thing. I am proud of the fact that my Wraparound practice looks very different than what it looked like in 1983. I am proud of that. Why am I proud of that? Because what it tells me is I'm learning from the families I get to work with. It tells me, if you looked at what I was doing with Wraparound in Kenai, Alaska, it looks really different today. And I still do facilitate Wraparound plans and teams in my community for the kids who get kicked out of Wraparound, which makes my head explode. But that's a whole different question. And so when we think about this, we kind of see what's happening. We see how things are turning out.
The real world isn't what I thought it was.
It never is. And isn't that marvelous?
We see that the system we got is the system we got. I often will tell parents, God gives you the kids you need, not necessarily the kids you want. That's just a fact. And if you feel like not my kid, then you're going to have grandkids and it will be your kid. We're all just 5 minutes away from being on the other side of that counter. But here's the other thing I tell Wraparound coordinators. God gives you the system you need, not the system you want. And it is very, very messy. But there are things that we are learning as we go along. One of the things that we've learned is that breath isn't voice unless we work at it. What I want to say to you is just inviting a parent and child to the table is not the same as voice. That's just having somebody in the room breathing versus we're working really hard at hearing, understanding, and accepting what it is that we hear from people. I met a father this morning who kicked somebody out of his kid's IEP meeting from the school. I was very impressed with that. I would guess that that father had a lot of breath and not a lot of voice at that moment, and the only way to get voice is to eject some people from the team. We all need to work at that, and every time we go to a team meeting, we got to lean into that. And that's all of our jobs. It's not just the job of the coordinator, it's not just the job of the facilitator, it's not just the job of the parent, it's all of our jobs. The second thing, meeting and teaming are two very different things. But I want you to be clear about this. Meetings are easier to count because we can check them on a box. There's a big difference between having meetings and really having a team. That feeling like they're with us in this thing. When we talk to families, that's what they consistently say. It wasn't that these people had the answer. What it was is they were with us. It just didn't feel like it was just us. Somebody else was paying attention. And so this idea of building teams is tough. It's the third thing. It takes a lot to authentically bear witness. To really bear witness to a family's story, to bear witness to a child's experience, to really pay attention to that hole in the heart, to pay attention to the suffering and joy that comes from being part of a family that's on the other side of the counter. And so system stories can bury a family story. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was blessed to be on a free-form project with a large mental health center. And part of what we were interested in doing is finding the kids before they became Wraparound eligible. We said, this is crazy. We just wait for them to fail and fail out. And so we want to learn really who the kids are. And in that project, we just studied these kids and their stories for a couple of years. And in that project, we discovered some things that were interesting. One of the things that was interesting was that parents were disconnected from their kids' treatment. By this time, at best, they were dropping them off. And when we went to staff and said, how did this happen? They said, well, the parents just want a quick fix. We said, well, that's kind of interesting. And so then we said to the staff, well, have you asked the parent? Well, no, they've been in services off and on for years, and they just want quick fix. So we worked with a couple of staff, and they went out and started talking to the parents. Guess what they found out? They found out that parents had been disconnected years ago, and that there was always more to the family story, and none of that was reflected in the system story. Everybody was focusing on what the system said or the files said, and nobody was focused on the family story. And so when we bear witness, we have to recognize that what we're asking care coordinators to do is dig up that family story and find a way to plant it within systems so people understand the identity of family. Not just, here's a special ed student who's classified as SED, who's doing this, who's doing that, but really, who is this family? And we all have to work to do that and pay attention to what matters. We are blessed that families share their stories. Our responsibility is to carry those stories on with us. And what we have may not be enough. I'm going to come back to that. But every family deserves creativity and imagination and balance. Every family deserves balance. What does balance look like? Balance looks like, for me, this is that kind of holy trinity of intervention, support, and community belonging. Here's a question I would ask you. If this were your child, would you give up support in order to get the best intervention for your child? Would you say, that's okay, we don't need support, just get them the intervention? Maybe in the short term, but over time, is a life worth living without support? Would you say, I'll give up community membership and a sense of belonging? I'll give up who you are in order to access either intervention or support? You wouldn't do it. You'd say, we all deserve all three of those things and we deserve them at the same time. And so when we think about interventions, they're actions taken to improve a situation. They're goal-oriented. They produce a result. Of course, if I said to Rob, how about if I got this thing that will help your child? Rob would say, yeah, do it. And this is what I expect to happen. Rob would say, yeah, do it. Try that medication. Try that therapy. Try that whatever. Do what you need to do to ease the pain. And part of what we're trying to do is get the right interventions in the right way, at the right time, for the right reason, to produce the right result. That's all we're asking for. Whether it's your kid being in a special ed classroom or even an out-of-home placement, we need to be clear about the intervention. But let me talk a little bit about support. Support is a powerful thing. And I define support as the actions taken to hold up or share the weight of a burden, of a thing. While all activities should be supportive, peer support is a particular type of support. And I worry about this, and I worry about this a lot, because more and more nationally, I see people saying, well, we've got parent peers to go with parents to IEP meetings. For one of two reasons. Either they need to go to explain what's happening in the IEP meeting, or we know the meeting is going to be so toxic that we want a peer support to be there. Here's what I would tell you. If your meetings are that toxic, change your damn meetings. Don't bring an extra person in to make those meetings land better. Change them. There's nothing that says we can't have meetings that are affirming, that are connecting, that build a life. And so we want to be careful about hijacking peers into other roles. One of the other places where I see peers being used in a way that doesn't make sense is we bring a peer in, and I see this in wraparound meetings as well. We bring the parent peer and the youth peer to the wraparound meeting to make sure the parent's voice is heard. What I would say is you better go back to your training because your care coordinator is not doing their job if they can't construct a meeting where everybody's voice is heard. Where do we want peer support to come? We want peer support to come, especially for parents, because these parents are walking around with a story they've been carrying for years, and that story is largely unrecorded. And it's a big story. Again, when I tell you we're all 5 minutes away from being on the other side of the counter, you want that parent's story to be highlighted, to be known, to be understood, because it's going to make your path or your own child's path clearer and better. It is a healing thing to know what parents go through. And so when we think about this, what we want to think about is we want to think about how do we build in authentic peer support so that no parent has to go alone, so that no youth has to feel like, oh God, I'm on my own, but there's a way for them to speak about it. How many of you know kids that have been in the system that their early 20s were hell? About 18, when they had franchise, they said, I'm not taking that medicine. Anybody know that kid? And then they do what we all did as 18-year-olds. Jason probably didn't, but the rest of us as 18-year-olds that rebelled and did stupid things, but their limits were bigger, and so they may be living with it for the rest of their lives. If we build youth peer supports to tell that story and create connection, sooner there's a chance we can recover those early 20s and not have this disastrous thing that happens. There has to be a way for young people to talk to other young people to say, I know you, I see you, and I've been through this, not as an example of what you could be, but instead as the reality that what you are is not so shameful or alone as we would expect it to be. We got to get kids talking about that sooner, not later, and we've got to get the parent story to also be told. And so when I think about support, we want to have supportive activities, but we also want to make sure that no parent, no child ever has to feel like it's only me. And remember this, the biggest disabling condition of a diagnosis is simply loneliness. That we can fix. I can't fix the symptoms, but I can fix the loneliness. I can hook you up with somebody else who's been on that path with you. I can make sure you don't have to do it alone. The third thing that we're looking for is community membership and identity. And community membership and identity is about where's your sense of belonging? Who are you? You know, when we send kids to specialized schools, do they get to take their student ID with them so that they can get into the football game or volleyball? I understand Wisconsin has a great volleyball team. Am I hearing that right? Yes, now they're clapping. That woke them up. So, you know, do they have that student ID? Does the parent who has the kid, who everybody is targeted as he's the problem, not the problem's the problem, the kid's the problem, do they have membership into the Parent-Teacher Association, for example? Or do they feel like they're on the fringe? Because I'm the parent of that child. This is all about how do we build welcoming communities? How do we build that sense of connection and sense of belonging? Do we do enough with extended family to find a language for the children when we've got brothers and sisters and cousins who just know that little Johnny acts weird? Are we supporting families on how to educate out? Are we building that sense? Because that's where identity starts. You know, what's the first question we ask a new person? What do you do for a living? What's the second question? Where do you people come from? If we've been moving kids around or they've been isolated, how do they answer that question? And so it's really about addressing a sense of who I am and where do I fit in. And that should be every child's birthright, and it should be every parent's birthright. And again, to quote Barbie, what I would say is your story is perfectly perfect. That's what it comes down to. And families deserve all three of these things at the same time. But they ask for so much less. I'm astounded by how much families settle for. And what is it that families are looking for?
Go. I have an idea.
Tell me your secret dream, child.
Okay, what about ordinary Barbie? She's not extraordinary. She's not president of anything. Or maybe she is. Maybe she's a mom. Maybe she's not. Because it's okay to just want to be a mom, or to want to be president, or a mom who is president, or not a mom who is also not president. She just has a flattering top, and she wants to get through the day feeling kind of good about herself.
That's a terrible idea.
Yeah, that's going to make money.
Oh, ordinary Barbie, I love it.
I like this clip because it is the perfect example of when structure and soul comes together. At some point, we recognize within systems, this makes good sense. Why do we listen to families? Makes good sense. Makes good business sense. Makes good sense. Makes a difference. The project I mentioned that I started at the beginning, started to work with at the beginning of the pandemic, here's what's happened. And this is a big deal. In every other county in that state, crisis calls and hospitalizations have increased dramatically. In that county, crisis calls have increased, but hospitalizations have dropped to nearly none. And I said to staff, why is that? And they said, oh, it's really easy. We now know the parents. They drop by. They talk to us. And when there's a risk, we work with them to figure out what the calculated risk is and what the reward is. And often, what happens is when we work it out, parents will say, I don't want her to go to that hospital because I think there'll be consequences down the road, but maybe if we did this and you could check in, we could get through the storm over the next 72 hours. So that agency, that county, they're happy. They got more people coming in the front door. They got more drop-bys by parents, and there's some time stuff, and so they've had to reorganize, but they're happy. They have bucked the trend that we are seeing in every other county in that state. So we are cautiously optimistic about that. And so when we think about what we're trying to produce with Wraparound, it's much more than having a meeting and putting strengths on the wall and generating needs statements. It's really about what are we going to do to change the trajectory of what we've been doing. Part of that equation is also empowering our system partners to dream as well. And so when we think about changing the actual plan of care, it's really about degrees of customization, I like to call it. There are some kids that you're working with where what you got is what they need, get it off the shelf. Then there are other kids you're working with that what you got is what they would need, but they need it a little different. And we might have to tailor it. We call that tailoring. We might have to change it in terms of time or density, duration, location. Maybe Rob's daughter is going to do better having, therapy in a 3-hour block once a month rather than 1 hour a week. How do we manage that? And then the ones on the end are the created kids, the ones where we need to make up the one service at a time and say, I never want to do this again, but we're going to try it here. Early on in a community I was living in, we came up with a plan to send the therapist, the mother, and the kids on a whitewater rafting 3-day weekend. And the therapist said, I hate you. And I said, I know, but go. And the mom said, I hate you, I don't like the therapist. I said, I know, but go. And then we all went down to the end of the river and waited for them to emerge. And they were late, and we were nervous and thought, oh my God, somebody's killed somebody. And then they kind of came paddling up, and the kids were mad. But the therapist and the mom were like sitting in the back, telling them where to steer. They said about 4 hours in, we realized we were all going to die if we didn't work together. Because these kids would have killed us. They wanted to go through every raft, every fall. They didn't care. They got no fear. But we realized that if we worked together, we could manage this. I know that young man, and I know what he does for a living today, which makes me laugh, and I'm just going to tell you this story. He had been in 27 different residential placements, and he was known as the property damager. In 27 different residential placements, he had single-handedly destroyed their timeout room 18 times. Took it down to the rafters. Today he runs, I think this is hysterical, he runs a successful construction company where he does demolition. I swear to God. And he does it in LA for the stars. So who knows? Understand that what you're doing today is probably a pathway for tomorrow. And that guy's got hustle. He can make money better than anybody I know. So families deserve all three, but ask for so much less. And in many respects, it comes down to, I just want a normal life and an attractive top. So what are some solutions as we move forward? First of all, I kind of feel like we've gotten to this place in Wraparound, and there are two paths in front of us. One path is it becomes codified, becomes ritualized. It's not a bad thing, but it becomes that thing, and it's not the same thing that got us started. And I think for a percentage of families, it will be helpful. I think the other path is we say, what's next? What's next? Can we take that same energy and think about what's next? And one of the big ideas I want to bring to you today is that coordination is everybody's job, not just the job of the person with coordination in their title. The question we have to figure out is how can we build the capacity to coordinate across a therapist, across an in-home worker, across a psychiatrist, and how do we build the skill set? You guys have been working at this a long time. You know your care coordinator workforce. There are skills that are transferable to other roles. Thinking about you, Rob. I'm thinking about some of those stories I heard from you a couple years ago. I'm thinking about when you had the perfect psychiatrist and said, this person gets me. And I'm thinking about that person had the talent to coordinate with other people. What we want to do is make sure that every psychiatrist has the skill to coordinate, because we always have to get past just having the talented part of the workforce. And so I want to think about coordination as the job of all of us, whether you're a classroom teacher, whether you're the special ed coordinator, whether you're the outpatient therapist. How do we think about coordination not as a task and not as a title, but as a set of functions that allow us to communicate and collaborate around this thing? And this thing is, what is the parent's sense of hope and future, and what is the child's sense of hope and future? Why? Because we all deserve to have a sense of hope and future. Here's the other thing. Expectancy, a sense that things can get better, tends to associate with better outcomes. We've all seen it. Anybody who's worked in the field for longer than a minute, you've met those kids or families that just knock you off your feet. You say, how is it they're getting through this? Well, how they're getting through this is they have a sense of hope and expectancy. And so that's one big idea I want to bring to you guys, is how do we blend and build in coordination, communication, collaboration, regardless of whether you're in a specialized project or you're at the front door of the mental health center. Second thing, we've got to quit thinking about engagement as a thing or a phase. Engagement is a continuous, it's not what we do at the beginning of Wraparound, it's who we are when we elect to work in communities with families. What does that mean? I might get you at hello, but I can also lose you at the next hello. Engagement is about finding that way to cultivate a sense of acceptance and appreciation for the fact that you're willing to share your story with me. And it's recognizing the roller coaster of things. For the parents in the room, have there been times when you've done better than not? Have there been times when you've barked at? maybe a coordinator, snapped at them when things weren't going very well. Anybody ever done that? This one's wearing it like a badge of honor. It's on his rap sheet. So the thing is, it's always going to be up and down, but it's a glorious ride. And our job is to cultivate that sense of engagement and acceptance and appreciation throughout the ride. The other thing we need to do is we need to really accept the idea that the ritual of wraparound continues to evolve, rather than creating new rules to keep it from evolving. There's this tendency to want to say, we've got to define wraparound, therefore we need to have rules. There's got to be this many of that and that many of this. And do you have this form filled out? Rather than saying, these rituals are going to change. And again, I spend a lot of time working with youth peers right now, and they just have a different view of the world. They solve problems differently than I do. And so I'm excited to see what wraparound would look like in their hands, because it's going to change whether or not we build the rules or not. The other thing we've got to do is move away from this measurement of how hard we're working, even when things we're doing is hardly working. The other thing we need to do is build systems on this idea of what does it mean to be creative? What does it mean to be creative? And so when I talk about audits, what I'm kind of obsessed about, could we create learning-based audits rather than gotcha-based audits? Could we set it up so that your workers came to work when audit time came, saying, God, I can hardly wait to be there because I'm going to learn something new this trip? Wouldn't that be great? I think we can do that, but that's part of what we have to do in terms of changing the system. The second thing we need to do in terms of taming those system dragons, we got to figure out how to increase family participation in building accountability. We've got to say to families, this is what it looks like. Help us make sure that we're doing what we said, and if we're not doing what we said, do we have a good reason for not doing it? That's a conversation families are willing to have, but we leave out that important part when we build accountability. What was it like for you? Did this add value to you? My life flashed before my eyes when a youth peer said to me, Pat, if you'd had more kids in the room when you guys made up Wraparound, it wouldn't look the way you built it. He said, the worst thing you can do is have a team meeting. He said, you know what it's like to be a teenager and go to a room at a meeting with everybody else being an adult? Do you know what that's like? Any of you ever have those experiences as a teenager? It wasn't fun. Sister Mary Pierre called me in. I thought, this is it. My life flashed before my eyes. I knew it was going to be bad. And there they all were, Sister Jose, Sister Mary Pierre, Sister Mary Tyler Moore. I don't know, it was terrible. So, we've got to find a way for families to give us that feedback and to use that feedback to improve. Not because we want to burden them with doing our job, but because their perspective is valid. I think that the other thing when we talk about that third A, in terms of things we need to tame, we got to work on trusting teams with the authorization, with the authority. When you guys have a child who ends up placed, here's my question. How much can a care coordinator impact what happens in that placement? Or is it sort of a handoff? Child goes into placement, and when it's time to prepare for discharge, we call the coordinators. How many of you have had that experience? Here's what we want to do. And if we're going to keep funding placement, and I think we are, then what we need to do is we need to open those doors and build those walls so that the community not only drives the door in, but we also impact what's happening when they're in those walls. All of the coordinators need to be licensed to practice in your facilities. All of the facilities, when they say, yes, we will help by providing a safe space for this child, their follow-up question needs to be, community, what is it you need us to do in order to make sure this child is in a place where they can practice attachment with the people who love them more readily? We've got to change that. Rather than we put you at the front door, we put you at the back door. So we need teams to be authorized to do that. We trust these teams that we create with the lives of children, but not necessarily the most expensive resources in our system. And so when we think about this, what does it mean to move forward with the future of Wraparound?
All right, let's begin the work to close the portal between our two worlds.
Hey, what about Barbie?
What do you mean?
What's her ending? What does she get?
Well, that's easy. She's in love with Ken.
That is not her ending.
I'm not in love with Ken.
What do you want?
I don't know. I'm not really sure where I belong anymore. I don't think I have an ending.
So this is an interesting kind of scene when we think about Wraparound. What's the ending for Wraparound? Where does Wraparound end? And just like Barbie, we start to discover maybe it's not an ending. Maybe there is not an answer, a simple solution, a new evidence-based practice, a new team configured to do all this. Maybe there's not an ending, maybe there's not an answer. And so it brings me to where I wanted to go, which is, where does Wraparound go from here? You've gone from 30 people in a small hotel room somewhere in Wisconsin to 750 people in a large hotel room. And this question about, well, what's next? What's next? We don't want to end up with hardening of the categories where we're doing the same thing over and over again. The thing we have to get our head wrapped around is that there may not be an answer. That in Wraparound, it may be, just like it is for families, not about the answer, but about the meaning. We think about the journey that families go on. It's not that they're coming back saying, oh my God, I had a team meeting and now my child's behavior is cured. It's not that. It's that they come back and say, this is my kid. Who better than me to raise this kid? I'll be there no matter what. As Hugh said, there's nothing you can do to make me love you less. And isn't it great? We got to go together. But to get there is very messy. And it's not as easy for the staff, for the parents, for the youth, for the ancillary partners. It's never that easy. And so what does it look like when we think about a new meaning?
You understand that humans only have one ending. Ideas live forever. Humans not so much. You know that, right?
I do.
Being a human can be pretty uncomfortable.
I know.
Humans make things up like patriarchy and Barbie just to deal with how uncomfortable it is.
I understand that.
And then you die.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to be a part of the people that make meaning, not the thing that's made.
So I want to be clear about this. Just like Barbie and Wraparound, what we're doing is making a meaning. We're not a service, we are making a meaning. We are creating a pathway so that people can make a meaning. And so, for those of you that are working in this and are going, oh my God, now what? You know, she started with old movies, she's got us into new movies. What is she saying to us? My question is, are you ready? Are you prepared to make that move? For the parents, are you prepared to take a risk that something could be better, even though you fought so desperately for where you are now? Are you prepared to say, we can do better at this? We can move forward. And it really comes down, at the end of the day, to the people in the community, the people in this room. Are you ready?
Yes.
So, my challenge to you walking out of here, get ready for the next thing. It's coming, and it's going to be glorious. I can see it, but it's still a little fuzzy. Another half-baked idea. Second thing I want you to do, have a little bit of fun along the way. Have some fun. Come to these things, network, have some fun. Talk to the families you get to talk to. Think about those stories and what they do for you. Give yourself permission to ask the next best question. Give yourself permission to say, what's the next best question? I wonder what this is. Why would he need to act that way? What do you think's going on? What's the thing that keeps you up at night? Mom or dad? That, when your head hits the pillow, you say, oh, I wonder if it was this thing. Give yourself permission to ask that next best question, because if you ask the next best question, you may just find the next best answer. It won't be the final one, it's just the next best answer. Remember, and also remember this always, family is always more important than the process. Wraparound's great. I love Wraparound. Wraparound's made me happy. It keeps me creative. But the family is always more important than my Wraparound practice. And that becomes very important. How can we adjust Wraparound to make it work for the family who doesn't want to play? I don't want to do Wraparound. And along the way, find a little joy in your journey. So thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it. Have a great rest of the conference.